أحتاج غيثا صافيا يكفي بروقا إنني أحتاج غيثا صافيا يكفي بروقا صافيا يكفي بروقا
كنت ميتا في بحور الغي والإثم غريقا كنت عابدا في قيود الذنب مملوكا رقيقا مد لي الشيطان من أسبابه حبلا وثيقا منكرات كنت آتيها غروبا وشروقا غازت الآثام لحمي ثم عظمي والعروقا كنت في التفحيط نجما يبهر الدنيا بريقا أجهدت سيارتي من شدة الزحف الطريقا يا رفيق الدار يا رفيق الدرب مهما كنت فذا لن تفوقا.
يا أيها الذين آمنوا إن جاءكم فاسق بنبأ فتبينوا أن تصيبوا قوما بجهالة فتصبحوا على ما فعلتم نادمين.
For this video, the objective is to help provide you with concepts and steps to think about when navigating through our modern news age, where everything is unclear, where the truth is often embedded in a stream of lies, meaning the title of this piece, of course, dealing with fake news. The topics we will cover are the following. 1. Understanding news. 2. Delivery, influence. 3. The presenters. 4. To accept or reject. And 5. Finding reliable sources. To begin, number 1, understanding news. So what is news? Some would say information that was previously unknown. Some else might argue a report on recent events. Whatever it is, we all collectively understand the concept of what news is. So there isn't no need for me there's no need for me to even define this for now, because we all come to an understanding collectively of what news is. So what I do want to focus on here is one thing. Is news free? What you see on the internet or the TV, is it really free? No. You're paying one important price in return for news. And the price you pay for accepting news is your trust. Of course, that's normal. You pay your trust in news, so you won't have to go through the effort to investigate yourself. Say if there's an earthquake happening, you're not going to buy equipment and a plane ticket and fly yourself out there to ask the locals and collect measurements. You pay for all that with your trust in the media. More importantly, you're not going to spend hours of your time researching, verifying news. So you will have to find a balance and assess the cost and benefit ratio for yourself in terms of your time investment. Concept number 2, delivery, influence. There are 3 types of news for our discussion today. Facts, lies, and lastly, the most common, which is a mix of facts and lies. We have to say that arriving to an objective truth when it comes to news, and do note, this is within the current system our news operates out of, is that it is nearly impossible to expect the complete truth, as mainstream news coverage doesn't necessarily follow a model that would allow it to do so, especially given the 4 characteristics of its model. The model, it incorporates and includes 4 crucial elements that I've narrowed it down to. These 4 are speed, accuracy, presentation, and narrative. So now if you really wanted to, you would have to hinder one of the above 4 to excel on the other. And note, I found these the most important factors through mainstream news. And I am speaking generally here. Keep that in mind, but nonetheless, for important news and politics, current events, and such, you will not find 100% truth for the most part. With this mixture of truth and false being the most common production we see, which is of course expected, especially when these outlets are trying to achieve the 4 aspects that I mentioned earlier: speed, accuracy, presentation, narrative. But maybe in the future discussion I could expand on these 4 concepts a bit more. Either way, most news operate with this level of understanding when trying to deliver their own news, while simultaneously competing with other outlets. So if you see one or the other delivery influence being tipped more on imagine a balanced scale, then know that the other factors are being hindered, or one could buff up one of the influence to cover up for the lack of the other element. Of course, again, I can expound on this upon another lecture. So the concept number 3, the presenters. So now let's identify 3 main contributors to news and their relationship to fake news, or what's most common, a truth hidden within lies. Within these 3 are the first, government, state, national, and local news. Some might be state-sponsored, some are mixed with private companies. However, at the end of the day, they all, to a certain degree, must obey the state on certain matters. All of whom, of course, have their own agendas and objectives to complete. And do note, depending on the degree of access of authoritative force within this state, some outlets may even be near 100% loyal to the state, while others, as you will find in America, often the media sway to a different administration or to a different parties, but most of the time the narrative is changed or the truth is stretched very thinly, and forming the most common we see misbelief in their coverage. The second group of presenters are non-state actors. The definition here might not be correct, but I choose it because it helps paint the image that I'm trying to convey here. Circumstances change depending on their motives and situations. Some can be more truthful than others based off of their intentions, their resources, while along others with the rest sort of follow their own unique objectives. And generally speaking, the general public will turn away from this news except to certain players involved, meaning such as the individual small group of people involved, or even a state who wishes to collect information for the research on these presenters. And when I say non-state actors, that does not only mean banned political parties in some third world country or a political group. I also include NGOs and lesser known media outlets, some of which, by the way, they may tether between the second or third categorization that you will see next. Which brings us to the last presenter, the independent individuals, or those of who are a group of people or a cult following that they just post just about anything, but they're loosely tied to one another. And many, of course not all, are involved within conspiracy theory. Some might be chasing clout or seeking fame, or just general anarchy. Some people just like causing chaos. But of course, some may be true, some might be false. But this can be, for example, random messages spread throughout WhatsApp. I know we see a lot of those in the coronavirus pandemic, or maybe even a random video of some unknown person or of authority that just went viral, like those fake nurse videos we're seeing. Or it can even be of those who chose to believe in a conspiracy theory. But the problem is, oftentimes, it can be skewed due to the staunch position of almost always indefinitely being on the opposite side of the state media. So what this means is the country might be saying something, point A, but the conspiracy element always have to take the opposite and take point B. Given that point A, or fact A, or statement A, has a mix of truth and lies, the opposite end in B will be the exact same thing, also including truth and lies. So these categories in the false news portion usually exert all their energy into either speed of their news delivery or changing the narrative. However, I don't want to make this negative for the third presenter, because also included into this section are independent researchers who have done numerous amazing contributions within their field. So these 3 contributors are something to be mindful of when you come across news verification. The fourth or fifth concept is now accepting or rejecting. Accept or reject. By default, you will read or listen to what is being presented to you. No matter what, the entire news piece or statement is going to be internalized in your brain. Now, it will be your duty to do the following: to properly digest the statements And don't just let it settle and cloud in your judgment. So I've outlined this in 5 steps. Step number 1. First, you must identify what is the source of the presentation. This is easily done by referring to the 3 above. Is the source of the presenter either a state, non-state, or independent individual? With due time, you can start recognizing the many different media outlets and the backgrounds naturally. Second step is seeing how that news was collected and verified by the presenter. You can easily do this by searching up either the article, or most of the time it will be stated in most news broadcasts. It is a red flag, of course, if it's not stated. Keep that in mind. Third step is now understanding what narrative is being created here. It's really figure out who is affected, who wins, who loses, who benefits out of this narrative. Step number 4, very important. Is there a neutral report, an opposing report, and a contender report, especially a non-state or independent piece? So if you follow step 3, you will be able to see the neutral report and know what to find when looking for opposing and contender pieces. Meaning, for example, the Republican or the Democrat accuse one of another, you would have to hear a statement from both sides, if possible. And that brings us to our last step, number 5. Once you have gathered all this information, you will have to base this off your judgment on what to make of the narrative once all steps are completed. And do not worry, once you get used to this, you will be able to do these steps very quickly, which of course is thanks to the internet. You can just Google search away, and as you can gather most of the information fairly quickly. And keep in mind, there's a general rule of thumb. If you cannot make up your mind on a claim or a statement or a piece, then break that piece down like this. Look at it this way. Say if the news is presented that someone named Mr. Johnson was attempting to rob an old lady in the alley. He pushed her and he broke her hip, and thus he successfully left fleeing the scene. Meanwhile, Mr. Johnson has claimed that this lady was calling him abusive names and was threatening and flailing at him, hitting him, and he pushed her away to avoid conflict, and he just happened to trip over, and the old lady just happened to trip over her own feet. Meaning that his narrative was completely different story. And to add another factor, there seems to be no additional information or verification for you to find out. What I would do personally, just assume that 1, an altercation occurred, 2, it happened in that alley, and 3, between these 2 parties. Leave it at that. No more, no less. Spreading unnecessary speculation without evidence does not help the general layman. However, all of that I just mentioned in this entire piece are for news pieces with competing information that have a bigger degree of implications involved. Generally speaking, if a news report something on the weather, natural disaster such as a storm or an earthquake, that sort of thing depends on where you live. You can follow through with a trusted media outlet, including state media, as the effort and time it takes needed to verify isn't really worth it for yourself, especially given their track record on these things, as you become more familiarized with these specific media outlets and your level of trust when it comes to their reports when it comes to these things. And that is why this method is mainly for competing news with different narratives that involve heavy implications. Likewise, minor details may not even be worthy of your time as well, and you may even take things with little verifications. Take this for example. Let's just say in the climax of World War I, Woodrow Wilson, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Mehmed V, and Tsar Nicholas II himself said that Tsar had a cat named Smokey. Then there's no need for you to verify too much, as it's safe to assume that he had a cat named Smokey. And of course, I'm speaking to the average person. as we refer back to the concept of cost of time when it comes to verifying. And now I end this off with the last concept, number 5, finding reliable news. By now you have realized that there's many nuances that are involved with this. And that is why we have to distinguish which news requires effort and which you can place your trust in. Best example would be weather. So for this section, we'll focus on serious matter where the media can absolutely not be trusted blindly. Let's just say, for example, we are living through the Napoleonic Wars today, and you're some random person in Europe. Things are constantly changing. The lines of territorial control is changing. Different allegiances are met. Different countries in most of Europe are involved in one form or the other. In fact, they all have their own propaganda outlets spreading information and disinformation. So how could someone make sense of all this in the 1800s? Start making a personal news feed for yourself. Yes, your own Napoleonic channel. Utilize different tools you have to add into the channels of the different European countries, include media of any of the officials, journalists, even include and throw in a conspiracy guy in there. Now, after a while, might take hours, days, weeks, or even a month, you'll be able to start seeing a trend of when it comes to verifying the different channels and outlets. It could even be which one delivers or emphasizes most on speed. Might be the one that emphasizes most either narrative or the presentation, whatever it might be. And especially the journalists and the independent researchers. You'll start seeing them pop up a lot. And you can select which channels you want to maintain, but don't delete them all. You want a blend of both sides, no matter how false or how much propaganda certain outlets keep putting. And this is important so you can always have a source or a consistent feed of validating and cross-referencing different claims. And more importantly, within this feed, you will then notice a trend of scholars and researchers who are always consistently named and sourced, and they're referred to as a scholarly authority on the subject, as well as less famous reporters who you have confirmed to have a trend of posting truthful information and sources. These independent individuals are the one who will be providing validated sources. There, you can use the media outlets to source the view with initial claims or cross-reference information. So when news reaches you in one of the propaganda outlets, you can then have a steady stream to verify it in a matter of hours. Or depending on the extent of the news and its impact, it might take days or weeks. However, this will take you to the closest to the proper evidence. Now look, there's a lot to cover. There's a lot of gray area, there's a lot of nuances involved, and I've kept this general, but now you should be able to use your best judgment when it comes to receiving news, handling news, even digesting your news. However, if this is too much work for you, then you've exchanged your right of trust to someone else that's not trustworthy. And that's the price you pay for not putting in the work. To put it shortly, the only way around this is verifying and evaluating certain outlets, but more specifically, individual researchers. I firmly believe if the general public was more aware into the methods and importance of the matter that I've outlined, we won't be surprised to find this as a growing trend of individual or independent researchers becoming some sort of media fan base of itself, or even celebrities, which I do hope that is the case, and that these researchers, their fame status, will be based off of their reputation and merits. I hope you all benefited. As I mentioned from the introduction, these contents are to help us begin these discussions. Please, by all means, expand on the things I've mentioned, improve upon any mistakes I made, or if you wish to clarify or add any additional points. This is the real purpose of these contents, starting these conversations. See you all next time.
يكفي بروقا إنني أحتاج غيثا صافيا يكفي بروقا صافيا يكفي بروقا